The laptop's screen glowed in the darkness of my bedroom, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through folder after folder of files I didn't recognize, bank statements with names I'd never heard of, and transaction records that made my stomach churn. The birthday gift my husband had given me just hours earlier, the first gift he'd ever bought me in front of his family, suddenly felt like a weapon pointed directly at my heart. I could still hear their voices echoing in my mind. Marlene's knowing smirk, Marian's barely contained laughter, Andrew's theatrical surprise face, and Levi's strange, almost guilty expression as he handed me the wrapped box. They had all been watching me so intently, waiting for something. But waiting for what? As I clicked on a file labeled transaction_log under 2024, my blood turned to ice. The screen filled with evidence of financial fraud, fake accounts, and stolen identities. And according to the timestamps, all of it had been happening from this very laptop. The laptop that was now in my possession. The laptop that had my fingerprints all over it. I slammed it shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. In the suffocating silence of my bedroom, one terrifying thought crystallized in my mind. They hadn't given me a gift at all. They had given me a trap. The morning of my 35th birthday started like any other day in the Christopher household, with me feeling invisible. I stood at the kitchen counter making coffee for everyone except myself, watching through the window as autumn leaves danced in the crisp October air. The house felt cold despite the heating being on, but then again it always felt cold when Levi's family was around. "Sylvia, dear," Marlene's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade wrapped in silk. "You've been stirring that coffee for 5 minutes. Are you quite all right?" I turned to face my mother-in-law, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass in my mouth. Marlene Christopher sat at the head of our dining table as if she owned the place. Which in many ways she did. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place, and her pale blue eyes held that familiar glint of amusement that always made me feel like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. "I'm fine, Marlene. Just thinking." "Dangerous habit," Marian chimed in from across the table, not bothering to look up from her phone. My sister-in-law was 32 but acted like she was still in high school, complete with the eye-rolling and snide comments. "Thinking too much can give you wrinkles." Andrew snorted into his coffee cup. "As if she doesn't have enough of those already." The casual cruelty of the comment hit me like a slap, but I'd learned long ago not to react. Levi's younger brother had always been the golden child, handsome, charming, and completely reckless with other people's feelings. At 28 he still lived off his trust fund and acted like the world owed him everything. "Andrew," Levi's voice carried a warning tone, but it was half-hearted at best. My husband of 7 years sat at the opposite end of the table from his mother, scrolling through his tablet with the same detached expression he wore most days. "Be nice. It's her birthday." "Oh right," Marian looked up with mock surprise. "Happy birthday, Sylvia. How does it feel to be officially middle-aged?" I gripped the coffee pot tighter, feeling the heat seep through the handle. "Wonderful. Thank you for asking." Marlene's lips curved into what might have been a smile on anyone else, but on her looked more like a predator baring its teeth. 35. Such an interesting age for a woman. Old enough to know better, young enough to still make terrible mistakes. The words hung in the air like smoke, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to tell me something. But before I could analyze it further, Levi cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, setting down his tablet and looking directly at me for the first time all morning, "I have something for you." The room went completely silent. In 7 years of marriage, Levi had never given me a birthday gift in front of his family. Hell, he barely remembered my birthday most years unless I reminded him. The few gifts I'd received over the years had been hastily purchased afterthoughts. A generic perfume set, a gift card to a restaurant I didn't like, once a book about gardening even though I'd never shown any interest in plants. "You do." I couldn't hide the surprise in my voice. Marlene's smirk deepened. Marian's fingers stilled on her phone screen. Andrew leaned back in his chair with an expression I couldn't quite read, like he was watching a movie and had already seen the ending. Levi stood up and walked to the hall closet, returning with a medium-sized box wrapped in silver paper. The wrapping was too neat, too professional. Levi couldn't wrap a sandwich properly, let alone achieve those perfect corners and crisp edges. "Here," he said, placing the box in front of me with an odd formality. Happy birthday, Sylvia. I stared at the box, my hands frozen in midair. Something felt wrong. The way they were all watching me, the strange tension in the room, the fact that Levi was actually giving me a gift in front of his family. It all felt like a performance and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. Well, Marlene's voice was silk over steel. Aren't you going to open it? My fingers fumbled with the wrapping paper, hyper-aware of 4 pairs of eyes tracking my every movement. The paper fell away to reveal a plain cardboard box, the kind you might get from any electronics store. I lifted the lid and found myself staring at a laptop computer. Oh, I breathed, genuinely surprised. Levi, this is really thoughtful. It was a nice laptop, or at least it looked nice. Silver with a sleek design, though I noticed some scratches along the edges and the keys looked slightly worn, as if the letters had been rubbed away from heavy use. But I pushed those observations aside. Maybe he'd gotten a good deal on a refurbished model. The thought that he'd actually put effort into getting me something useful made my chest warm with an emotion I hadn't felt in months. Do you like it? Levi asked, but there was something strange in his voice. Not the usual indifference, but not genuine concern either. It sounded almost nervous. I love it, I said, and for a moment I meant it. Thank you. Really. This is perfect for my freelance work. Marion made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. How practical. Very practical, Andrew agreed, and when I looked at him, he was wearing what I could only describe as a "we decided to surprise you" face, like he was in on some elaborate joke. Marlene just continued smiling that predatory smile. I'm sure you'll get a lot of use out of it, dear. Won't you, Sylvia? There was something in the way she said my name that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I closed the laptop box and hugged it to my chest, trying to recapture that brief moment of warmth I'd felt. I will. Thank you all for being here today. Wouldn't miss it, Andrew said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. Not for the world. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of stilted conversation and meaningful glances that I wasn't privy to. Levi's family left around noon, each of them giving me overly enthusiastic hugs and birthday wishes that felt more like warnings than well wishes. After they were gone, I found Levi in his study typing away at his desktop computer. Thank you again for the laptop, I said, hovering in the doorway. It really was a surprise. He didn't look up from his screen. Glad you liked it. I did. I do. I paused, searching for the right words. It's just, you've never given me a gift in front of your family before. So I was wondering why now. What changed? Finally, he looked at me, and for just a second I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Fear? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Can't a husband buy his wife a birthday present without getting the 3rd degree? The defensive tone in his voice made me take a step back. Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine, he cut me off, already turning back to his computer. Just enjoy the laptop, okay? I think you'll find it very educational. That night, after Levi had gone to bed, I sat in our bedroom with the laptop on my lap, finally ready to explore my gift properly. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I lifted the lid and pressed the power button, watching as the screen came to life with a soft blue glow. The startup process seemed normal enough, though I noticed it took longer than expected for a newer machine. When the desktop finally appeared, I was greeted with a generic wallpaper and a handful of folders scattered across the screen. My excitement began to dim as I took a closer look at the laptop itself. The scratches on the sides were deeper than I'd initially thought, and several of the keys had letters that were almost completely worn away. The trackpad had a small crack in the corner, and when I ran my finger along the edge of the screen, I could feel where the plastic casing had been slightly warped. This wasn't a refurbished laptop. This was someone's old, heavily used computer. I tried to push down the disappointment that rose in my throat. So what if it wasn't new? Levi had still thought of me, had still made an effort. That had to count for something, right? I clicked on one of the folders on the desktop, labeled Documents. Inside were dozens of files with names I didn't recognize. Spreadsheets with cryptic titles like account_transfers_Q3 and client_database_updated. I opened one at random and found myself staring at what looked like financial records, but not for any accounts I recognized. Frowning, I closed the file and tried another folder. This one was labeled Photos and contained hundreds of images, screenshots of bank websites, photos of identification cards, and what looked like scanned documents. None of it made any sense to me. A cold feeling began to settle in my stomach. Whose laptop was this? And why did Levi give it to me with all of this personal information still on it? I closed the laptop with a sharp snap, my hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would ask Levi about it. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd bought it from someone and hadn't realized there was still data on it. Maybe it was a simple oversight. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Levi snored softly beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this gift was simple. And the way his family had watched me open it, the strange looks and barely contained laughter, the feeling that I was missing something crucial, it all swirled together in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to solve. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marlene's predatory smile and heard Andrew's mock toast echoing in my ears. Not for the world. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a determination to get answers. Levi had already left for work by the time I made it downstairs, but that was nothing new. He'd been leaving earlier and earlier lately, claiming he had important meetings or deadlines to meet. I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the laptop, steeling myself to take another look at those strange files. In the harsh light of day, maybe they would make more sense. Maybe I was overreacting. I powered on the laptop again and immediately noticed something I'd missed the night before. A small sticker on the bottom corner of the screen with a name written in faded ink. Christopher. Christopher. Andrew Christopher. My blood ran cold. This was Andrew's laptop. My brother-in-law's laptop. The same Andrew who had made that strange face yesterday, who had acted like he was in on some elaborate joke. Why would Levi give me Andrew's old laptop as a birthday gift? With shaking fingers, I opened the documents folder again and began going through the files more systematically. What I found made my stomach churn. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, transaction records showing large sums of money being moved between different accounts, and spreadsheets that looked like they were tracking some kind of financial scheme. One file caught my attention, identity_database.xlsx. I opened it and found myself staring at a spreadsheet containing dozens of names, addresses, social security numbers, and bank account information. None of the names were familiar, but the level of detail was terrifying. This wasn't just random information. This was a carefully compiled database of personal financial data. I scrolled down, my heart pounding harder with each row. There had to be over 100 entries, each one representing a real person whose private information had been collected and cataloged. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, I found a column labeled Status with entries like Account Accessed, Transfer Complete, and Closed. This was fraud. Identity theft on a massive scale. And it was all on the laptop that was now sitting in my bedroom with my fingerprints all over it. I slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before I threw up. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. Andrew was involved in some kind of financial fraud scheme, and somehow his laptop had ended up as my birthday gift. But why? Why would they give this to me? I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes wide with fear and confusion. I looked like someone who had just discovered a bomb in their living room. Because that's exactly what this was. A bomb. A ticking time bomb that could destroy my life. I needed to talk to Levi. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I called his office, but his secretary told me he was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. I tried his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Growing more desperate, I called again an hour later. Sylvia. Levi's voice sounded strained when he finally answered. What's wrong? I'm in the middle of something important. I need to talk to you about the laptop, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There are files on it that... Not over the phone, he cut me off sharply. We'll talk when I get home. When will that be? There was a pause. I'm actually going to stop by my parents' house after work. Family dinner. You weren't invited. The casual cruelty of that last statement hit me like a physical blow. Levi, this is important. I really need to. It'll have to wait, he said and hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling more alone than I had in years. But then an idea began to form. If Levi was going to his parents' house and if this laptop really did belong to Andrew, Then maybe I should return it directly to him. Maybe I could get some answers about what was going on. The Christopher family estate was only a 20-minute drive from our house. I'd been there countless times over the years for holidays and family gatherings, though I'd never felt welcome. The sprawling colonial mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, surrounded by a wrought iron fence that had always reminded me more of a prison than a home. I parked at the end of the long driveway and walked toward the house, the laptop bag clutched tightly in my hands. The October air was crisp and carried the scent of burning leaves, but instead of feeling comforting, it made me think of funeral pyres. As I approached the front door, I could hear voices coming from inside. The windows were slightly open despite the cool weather, and the sound of conversation drifted out into the evening air. I raised my hand to knock, but something in the tone of the voices made me pause. They were speaking in hushed, urgent whispers. The kind of whispers people used when they were discussing something they didn't want overheard. I stepped closer to the window, my heart pounding. I knew I shouldn't eavesdrop, but something about the secretive nature of their conversation made me hesitate. What if they were talking about the laptop? What if I could finally get some answers? She will just think it's second-hand, Andrew's voice was saying. She's too stupid to notice anything else. My blood turned to ice. They were talking about me. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I opened the voice recorder app. Whatever they were discussing, I had a feeling I was going to need proof. If you hadn't decided to scam people in the first place, Marlene's cold voice cut through the air, we wouldn't even be here. But since you did, the least you could have done was cover your tracks properly. Forgetting to use the VPN was incredibly stupid. It was one time, Mom. Andrew's voice was defensive, almost whining. One time I forgot to turn it on. The police can't prove anything anyway. Relax, another voice chimed in, Marion. Nobody's gonna trace a few fake accounts back to you. And even if they did, the laptop isn't yours anymore, is it? My legs felt like they were going to give out. I pressed myself against the side of the house, trying to stay hidden while keeping my phone positioned to catch every word. The recording app showed the red dot blinking steadily. Listen, Levi's voice made my heart stop completely. If the police come knocking, it won't be for you, Andrew. It'll be for her. Exactly, Marion's voice was filled with cruel satisfaction. The laptop is in her room now. All those files, all that evidence, they'll think it's hers. Poor little Sylvia finally snapped and decided to make some easy money. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from crying out. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that I felt like I was drowning in it. My own husband, the man I'd loved and trusted for 7 years, was setting me up to take the fall for his brother's crimes. She won't even figure it out, Levi continued, and I could hear the casual dismissal in his voice. You know how she is. She'll probably just think it's a nice gift and never look too closely at what's on it. And if she does? Marlene asked. Then we stick to the story, Andrew said. We gave her a laptop for her birthday. We had no idea what was on it. She must have put those files there herself. The beauty of it, Marion added with a laugh that made my skin crawl, is that she's been struggling financially with that pathetic freelance writing business of hers. Everyone knows she's been desperate for money. It'll be so easy to believe she turned to fraud. Plus, Levi's voice was getting closer to the window and I pressed myself flatter against the wall. She's been acting strange lately. Paranoid. Asking too many questions. If she tries to claim we set her up, who's going to believe her? The unstable wife with a history of mental health issues, or the respected Christopher family? Mental health issues. I'd gone to therapy for depression after my miscarriage 3 years ago, but I'd never told anyone except Levi. The fact that he was planning to use my darkest moment against me made me feel physically sick. How long before the investigation catches up? Marlene asked. Could be weeks, could be months, Andrew replied. But when it does, all roads will lead straight to that laptop. And that laptop is now legally hers. We have witnesses to prove we gave it to her as a gift. Perfect. Marlene's voice was filled with cold satisfaction. Andrew cleans up his mess and we get rid of our little problem at the same time. Little problem. That's what I was to them. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of trying to fit into this family, 7 years of enduring their subtle cruelties and dismissive comments. And I was just a little problem to be disposed of. I heard footsteps moving toward the front of the house and realized they might be wrapping up their conversation. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely stop the recording, but I managed to save the file before shoving my phone back into my pocket. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept away from the window and back toward my car. Every step felt like it took an eternity, and I kept expecting to hear the front door open behind me, to hear them calling my name, to be caught in the act of discovering their betrayal. But I made it to my car without being seen. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my whole body trembling with shock and rage and fear. The recording on my phone was proof of their conspiracy, but would it be enough? They were the Christopher family, wealthy, respected, connected. I was just Sylvia, the unstable wife with mental health issues. But I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I started the car and drove straight to the police station. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. The Millbrook Police Station was a squat brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and hadn't been updated since. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, institutional glow. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair across from Detective Rebecca Torres, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Mrs. Christopher," Detective Torres said, her voice gentle but professional. "I want to make sure I understand what you're telling me. You believe your husband and his family are trying to frame you for financial fraud." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. "I have proof. I recorded them talking about it." I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made outside the Christopher house. Detective Torres listened intently, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When the recording ended, she sat back in her chair and studied me carefully. "This is certainly concerning," she said. "And you say the laptop in question is currently in your possession?" "Yes. It's at home. I brought it with me tonight because I was planning to return it to Andrew, that's my brother-in-law. But then I heard them talking and realized what was really going on." "I'm going to need to see that laptop," Detective Torres said. "And I'll need you to walk me through exactly what you found on it." For the next 2 hours I went through everything. The strange files, the identity database, the bank records, the evidence of fraud that was scattered across Andrew's old computer. Detective Torres took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about dates, times, and specific file names. "Mrs. Christopher," she said finally, "I have to ask, is there any possibility that you were involved in these activities? Any chance that you might have used this laptop for fraudulent purposes?" The question hit me like a slap, even though I'd been expecting it. "No, absolutely not. I only got the laptop yesterday and I've never seen any of these files before in my life." "But you do have access to your husband's financial accounts?" "Some of them. We have a joint checking account, but Levi handles most of our finances. He says I'm not good with money." The words tasted bitter in my mouth as I said them. Detective Torres made another note. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Christopher. This is a complex situation. The evidence on the laptop is certainly damning, but proving who put it there and when is going to be challenging. Your recording helps, but a good defense attorney could argue that it's taken out of context or that you manipulated the situation somehow." My heart sank. "So you're saying there's nothing you can do?" "I'm saying we need to be smart about this. I'm going to start an investigation into the financial crimes documented on that laptop. In the meantime, I strongly advise you not to return home tonight." "What do you mean?" "If your husband and his family realize you've discovered their plan, they might try to accelerate their timeline. They could claim you stole the laptop or that you've been acting erratically. It would be better if you stayed somewhere safe while we sort this out." I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't even considered that they might try to hurt me physically, but Detective Torres was right. If they were willing to frame me for fraud, what else might they be capable of? "I don't have anywhere to go," I admitted. "I don't really have any close friends and my family lives across the country." "There's a women's shelter about 20 minutes from here," Detective Torres said gently. "It's not just for domestic violence cases. They help women in all kinds of dangerous situations. I can make a call." The word shelter made everything feel suddenly real. This wasn't just a marital problem or a family dispute. This was my life falling apart in real time. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, yes. Please." Detective Torres made the call while I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been a lonely but relatively stable married woman. Tonight, I was a potential fraud suspect seeking refuge in a women's shelter. "They're expecting you," Detective Torres said, hanging up the phone. "I'll have an officer escort you there and we'll keep your car here for now. It's better if your husband doesn't know where you are." As we walked toward the exit, Detective Torres put a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Christopher, Sylvia, I want you to know that I believe you. What you've described, the way they've manipulated this situation, it's more common than you might think. Wealthy families often think they can buy their way out of consequences, even if it means destroying innocent people in the process. Will you be able to stop them?" I asked. "I'm going to try. But I need you to be prepared for the possibility that this is going to get worse before it gets better. They're going to fight back and they're going to fight dirty." The women's shelter was a nondescript building in a residential neighborhood, designed to blend in and avoid attracting attention. The director, a woman named Carol, met me at the door with a warm smile and a cup of tea. "Detective Torres filled me in on your situation," Carol said as she led me to a small but clean room with a single bed and a dresser. "You're safe here. No one can find you unless you want them to." I sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching my purse and the laptop bag. "I don't understand how this happened. How did I not see it coming?" Carol sat down in the room's only chair, her expression compassionate but not pitying. "Manipulation is insidious. It happens slowly over time until you don't even recognize yourself anymore. The fact that you figured out what they were doing and had the courage to come forward, that takes incredible strength. I don't feel strong. I feel like an idiot." "You're not an idiot. You're a victim of a very calculated scheme. But you're also a survivor, and that's what matters now." That night, I lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd left the police station. Calls and texts from Levi, from Marlene, from Marion and Andrew. I'd turned off the sound, but I could see the screen lighting up every few minutes. Finally, around midnight, I turned the phone back on and listened to the voicemails. The first few were from Levi, his voice progressing from confused to concerned to angry. "Sylvia, where are you? Your car isn't in the driveway and you're not answering your phone. Call me back. Sylvia, this is ridiculous. Whatever's wrong, we can talk about it. Just come home. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not funny. People are starting to worry." Then came Marlene's voice, cold and controlled as always. "Sylvia, dear, Levi is quite concerned about you. We all are. Please call us back so we know you're safe." But it was the last message that made my blood run cold. Andrew's voice, no longer the careless, joking tone I was used to, but something darker and more threatening. "Sylvia, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to come home right now. You have something that belongs to me and I want it back. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I deleted all the messages and turned the phone off again. They knew. Somehow they knew I'd discovered their plan. But I wasn't the same woman who had opened that laptop 2 days ago. That woman had been naive, trusting, desperate for approval from people who saw her as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat. This woman was done being their victim. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Detective Torres called the shelter at 8 a.m. with an update that made my hands shake as I held the phone. "We executed a search warrant on your house this morning," she said. "Your husband wasn't there, but we found some very interesting things." "What kind of things?" "Financial documents hidden in his office. Bank statements for accounts that match some of the fraudulent activity on the laptop. And Sylvia, we found evidence that this has been going on for over 2 years. 2 years. I thought back to all the times Levi had claimed to be working late, all the mysterious phone calls he'd taken in another room, all the times he'd been evasive about money. The signs had been there, but I'd been too trusting or too afraid to see them. "There's more," Detective Torres continued. "We've been in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The scope of this fraud is much larger than we initially thought. We're talking about millions of dollars stolen from dozens of victims." Millions. I felt dizzy. Your brother-in-law wasn't just running a small-time scam. This was a sophisticated operation involving identity theft, bank fraud, and money laundering. And based on the evidence we've found, your husband was a full partner in the scheme. The betrayal cut even deeper than I'd thought possible. It wasn't just that Levi had been willing to frame me. He'd been actively participating in destroying innocent people's lives for years. What happens now? I asked. Now we build a case. The recording you made is crucial evidence, but we need more. We need to trace the money, identify all the victims, and prove the full extent of their operation. And what about me? Am I still a suspect? Officially, the investigation is ongoing. But between you and me, your story checks out. The timeline doesn't work for you to have been involved, and the evidence points clearly to Andrew and Levi as the primary perpetrators. I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me lightheaded. So I'm going to be okay? You're going to be okay, Detective Torres confirmed. But Sylvia, I need to warn you, they're going to try to discredit you. They're going to claim you're unstable, that you're lying, that you're trying to frame them. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the 7 years I'd spent walking on eggshells around the Christopher family, 7 years of being made to feel small and stupid and worthless. I thought about all the times I'd doubted myself, all the times I'd wondered if maybe I really was as pathetic as they made me feel. Let them try, I said, and I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. I have the truth on my side. Over the next few days, the investigation moved quickly. The FBI seized financial records from multiple banks, froze accounts linked to the fraud scheme, and began the process of identifying victims. The local news picked up the story, though they were careful not to name suspects while the investigation was ongoing. I stayed at the shelter, venturing out only for meetings with Detective Torres and the federal prosecutor who had been assigned to the case. Carol had been right. I was safe there, invisible in a way that felt protective rather than diminishing. But on Thursday morning, everything changed. I was having breakfast in the shelter's small dining room when Carol approached me with a grim expression. Sylvia, there are reporters outside. Someone leaked your name to the press. My stomach dropped. What are they saying? That you're a person of interest in a major fraud investigation. They're calling you the Black Widow of Millbrook, claiming you seduced your way into a wealthy family and then robbed them blind. I felt like I was going to be sick. But that's not true. The police know it's not true. The police know, but the public doesn't. And your husband's family is very good at controlling narratives. Carol was right. By noon, the story was everywhere. Local news, social media, even some national outlets had picked it up. The Christopher family had clearly launched a coordinated media campaign to paint me as the villain. The headlines were brutal. Local woman accused of defrauding in-laws. Marriage of convenience turns criminal. The Millbrook fraud, how one woman nearly destroyed a family. Each article painted the same picture. I was a gold digger who had married into the Christopher family for money, then turned to fraud when my husband's generosity wasn't enough. They quoted anonymous family sources, describing me as unstable, manipulative, and desperate. The worst part was how believable it all sounded. I could see how someone reading these articles would think I was guilty. The Christopher family was respected in the community, wealthy and charitable and well-connected. I was nobody, a failed writer with no family nearby and no real friends to vouch for my character. But then something unexpected happened. Detective Torres called that afternoon with news that made me sit up straighter. "We've had a breakthrough," she said. One of the fraud victims came forward after seeing the news coverage. She recognized Andrew Christopher's photo and confirmed that he was the one who contacted her pretending to be a bank representative. She can identify him? She can identify him, and she kept records of all their communications. Phone calls, emails, even a voicemail where he forgot to disguise his voice. It's exactly the evidence we needed to prove he was directly involved in the scam. My heart leaped with hope. So this proves I'm innocent? It proves Andrew was actively defrauding people, which supports your version of events. But there's more. We've also traced some of the stolen money to an account in your husband's name, an account you never had access to. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. Every new piece of evidence proved what I already knew, that the man I'd loved and trusted had been living a double life, stealing from innocent people while I slept beside him every night. "When will you arrest them?" I asked. "Soon. We're coordinating with the FBI to make sure we get everyone involved. But Sylvia, I need to prepare you for something. When we do make arrests, the media attention is going to intensify. The Christopher family is going to fight these charges with everything they have, and that means they're going to try to destroy your credibility even more aggressively." "I understand. Do you? Because it's going to get ugly. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life, every mistake you've ever made, every moment of weakness. They're going to try to make you look like a liar and a criminal. I thought about the therapy sessions after my miscarriage, the depression that had nearly swallowed me whole, the financial struggles that had made me feel like a failure. All of it would be dragged into the light and twisted to serve their narrative. Let them, I said quietly. I'm not the same person I was a week ago. I'm not going to let them intimidate me into silence. That evening, I sat in my small room at the shelter and made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. I was going to fight back. I opened my laptop, my real laptop, the old one I'd been using for my freelance work, and began to write. Not the careful, apologetic prose I usually produced, but something raw and honest and angry. I wrote about the 7 years of psychological manipulation, the constant undermining of my self-worth, the way they had made me feel grateful for scraps of basic human decency. I wrote about the discovery of the fraud, the recording I'd made, and the systematic way they had planned to destroy my life to save themselves. When I finished, I had a 3,000-word essay that laid out the truth in unflinching detail. I titled it The Real Story: How the Christopher Family Tried to Frame Me for Their Crimes. I posted it on every social media platform I could think of, sent it to local news outlets, and emailed it to the reporters who had been covering the story. Within hours, it was being shared and discussed across the internet. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from strangers who recognized the patterns of manipulation I described. Other fraud victims came forward with their own stories. Journalists began asking harder questions about the Christopher family's version of events. But the family's response was swift and vicious. By the next morning, they had released a statement through their lawyer claiming that my essay was the desperate fabrication of a disturbed individual attempting to avoid responsibility for her crimes. They produced medical records from my therapy sessions, somehow obtained illegally, and used my depression diagnosis to paint me as mentally unstable. They also filed a defamation lawsuit against me, seeking millions in damages for what they claimed were false and malicious statements that had damaged their reputation. I was sitting in the shelter's common room, reading about the lawsuit on my phone, when Carol sat down beside me. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I feel like I'm drowning," I admitted. "They have so much money, so much power. How am I supposed to fight them?" "The same way you've been fighting them," Carol said firmly. "With the truth. Money and power are formidable weapons, but they're not invincible. And you're not alone in this fight anymore." He was right. The essay had done more than just tell my side of the story. It had connected me with a community of people who understood what I was going through. Domestic abuse survivors, fraud victims, people who had been scapegoated by powerful families. They were sharing their own stories, offering support and helping to amplify my voice. More importantly, the essay had caught the attention of Anna Adriel, an investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corruption among wealthy families. She reached out to me that afternoon with an offer that made my heart race. "I want to do a deep dive into the Christopher family," she said during our phone call. "Not just the fraud case but their entire history. I have a feeling this isn't the first time they've destroyed someone to protect themselves." "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some preliminary research since your essay went viral. There are patterns here. Business partners who were mysteriously forced out, employees who were fired and then sued into silence, even a previous daughter-in-law who disappeared from public view after her divorce from Andrew." "Andrew was married before?" "Briefly, about 5 years ago. A woman named Glenda Hartwell. She filed for divorce citing emotional abuse, but then suddenly dropped all her claims and moved across the country. I tried to contact her but she won't talk. She's terrified of them. The idea that there were other victims, other women who had been crushed by the Christopher family's machine, made me feel sick. But it also made me more determined than ever to see this through." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything. Every detail you can remember about your marriage, about the family dynamics, about the way they operate. I want to build a complete picture of who these people really are." Over the next several days I spent hours on the phone with Anna, walking her through 7 years of marriage to Levi Christopher. I told her about the subtle put-downs that had eroded my self-confidence, the way they had isolated me from friends and family, the financial control that had made me dependent on them. I also told her about the good times, because there had been some, especially in the early days. Levi could be charming when he wanted to be, and there had been moments when I'd felt genuinely loved and valued. Those memories were almost harder to talk about than the abuse, because they reminded me of how completely I'd been fooled. Anna was a skilled interviewer, asking questions that helped me see patterns I'd never noticed before. The way Levi would undermine my confidence before important events, making me feel too insecure to socialize with his colleagues or friends. The way Marlene would make cutting comments disguised as concern, always in front of others so I couldn't respond without looking defensive. They're textbook psychological abusers, Anna said after one particularly difficult session. Everything they did was designed to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel like you needed them to survive. It worked, I said quietly. For 7 years it worked perfectly. But not anymore. You saw through their final manipulation and you had the courage to fight back. That takes incredible strength. The arrests came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I'd discovered the truth about the laptop. I was having coffee with Anna at a small cafe near the shelter when Detective Torres called with the news. "We've got them," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Andrew, Levi, and Marion are all in custody. We're still working on building a case against Marlene, but the other 3 are looking at serious federal charges." I felt a rush of emotions so intense I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Relief, vindication, grief for the life I'd thought I had. It all crashed over me at once. "What are the charges?" I managed to ask. "Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy, the works." The FBI estimates they stole over $4 million from more than 60 victims over the past 3 years. $4 million. 60 victims. The scope of their crimes was staggering. And the charges against me? Officially dropped as of this morning. The prosecutor is satisfied that you had no knowledge of or involvement in the fraud scheme. I started crying then right there in the cafe. Anna reached across the table and squeezed my hand while I sobbed with relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming realization that it was finally over. But of course it wasn't really over. It was just the beginning of a new phase. The arrests made national news. The story had everything the media loved: wealthy family, massive fraud, betrayal, and a woman who had fought back against impossible odds. I found myself at the center of a media storm that was both terrifying and empowering. The Christopher family's carefully constructed public image crumbled almost overnight. Anna's investigation had uncovered a pattern of abuse and manipulation going back decades. She found the previous daughter-in-law, Glenda, who finally agreed to speak on the record about her marriage to Andrew and the way the family had terrorized her into silence. She also found former business partners who had been cheated, employees who had been sexually harassed and then fired when they complained, and charity organizations that had been defrauded by the family's fake philanthropic activities. The picture that emerged was of a family that saw other people as objects to be used and discarded. A family that believed their wealth and status put them above the law and basic human decency. But even as their empire crumbled, they continued to fight dirty. Their lawyers filed motion after motion trying to get the charges dismissed, claiming prosecutorial misconduct and illegal searches. They hired a public relations firm to spread stories about my mental health, my financial desperation, my supposed history of lying and manipulation. The defamation lawsuit they'd filed against me was still pending, and their lawyers made it clear they intended to pursue it aggressively even while facing criminal charges themselves. They wanted to bankrupt me, to make me an example of what happened to people who dared to cross the Christopher family. But something had changed in the week since I'd first discovered their betrayal. The scared, isolated woman who had opened that laptop was gone, replaced by someone who had found her voice and wasn't afraid to use it. I hired my own lawyer, a fierce woman named Patricia Valdez who specialized in representing victims of powerful abusers. She took my case pro bono after reading Anna's articles, saying she was tired of watching wealthy families destroy innocent people with impunity. "They're going to try to break you financially and emotionally," Patricia warned me during our first meeting. "That's their playbook. But here's what they don't understand: you're not the same person you were when this started. You've found your strength, and that's something they can't take away from you." He was right. The woman who had spent 7 years apologizing for taking up space, who had been grateful for the smallest scraps of affection, who had doubted her own perceptions and memories, that woman was gone. In her place was someone who had looked evil in the face and refused to be destroyed by it. The trial began 6 months later. By then, the case had become a symbol of something larger: the way wealthy families used their power to abuse and exploit others, secure in the knowledge that money could buy them out of any consequences. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the entire story from the birthday gift to the discovery of the fraud to the recording I'd made outside the Christopher house. The defense attorneys tried everything they could think of to discredit me, bringing up my therapy sessions, my financial struggles, even suggesting that I had somehow manipulated the recording. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had traced the money, identified the victims, and built an airtight case against all 3 defendants. My recording was just one piece of a massive puzzle that painted a clear picture of their guilt. When the verdicts came in, guilty on all counts for all 3 defendants, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete, overwhelming vindication. Levi was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Andrew got 12 years. Marion, who had played a smaller role in the actual fraud but had been instrumental in the cover-up, received 8 years. Marlene was never charged criminally. The prosecutors couldn't prove she had direct knowledge of the fraud, but the civil lawsuits from the victims would eventually strip the family of most of their wealth. I'm writing this from my new apartment in Portland, Oregon, 3,000 miles away from Millbrook and the Christopher family. It's a small place, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelves, every coffee mug in the kitchen. I chose it all myself. The defamation lawsuit was eventually dropped after Patricia filed a countersuit that would have exposed even more of the family's dirty secrets. The Christophers' lawyers quietly made it go away, along with a settlement that helped me start over. Anna's investigation won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. Her series on the Christopher family led to a federal task force on financial crimes committed by wealthy families, and several other similar cases have been uncovered and prosecuted. I've started writing again. Not the careful, apologetic freelance work I used to do, but real writing. Honest writing. I'm working on a book about my experience, about the psychology of manipulation and the way abusers use shame and isolation to control their victims. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about the 7 years I lost, the life I thought I had that turned out to be a lie. The answer is complicated. Yes, I'm angry. I'm angry about the time I wasted, the confidence they stole from me, the way they made me doubt my own reality. I'm angry about the other victims, both the people they defrauded and the women like Glenda who were crushed by their cruelty. But I'm also grateful. Grateful that I found the strength to fight back, grateful for the people who helped me when I needed it most, grateful for the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. The woman who opened that laptop 6 months ago was broken, isolated, and convinced she was worthless. The woman writing these words knows better. She knows that she survived something that was designed to destroy her, and that survival has made her stronger than she ever imagined possible. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still catch myself doubting my own perceptions, still hear Marlene's voice in my head telling me I'm not good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. But then I remember the recording on my phone, the evidence that proved I was right all along. I remember Detective Torres believing me, Anna fighting for me, Patricia standing up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. Most of all, I remember that moment outside the Christopher house when I heard them planning to destroy me, and I made the choice to fight back instead of accepting my fate. That choice changed everything. It saved my life. And if you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're living with someone who makes you feel small and worthless, if you're surrounded by people who gaslight you and manipulate you and convince you that you're the problem, I want you to know something. You're stronger than you think. You deserve better than what they're giving you. And when the moment comes to choose between accepting their version of reality and trusting your own instincts, trust yourself. The truth has a power that all their money and manipulation can't touch. And sometimes if you're brave enough to speak it, the truth can set you free.